This episode is brought to you by New Moon Wishing, a self-care guidebook for wishful thinkers. Please see the link in the show notes.
Welcome to the Starzology Astrology podcast. I'm your host, Arwynne O'Neill, again with my friend Katia.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We are going to be talking about acupuncture. Katia is an acupuncturist, and she's going to be telling us a bit about her career, what brought her to this practice. We're going to be talking about the 12 meridians, which are the points in the body that acupuncture targets to do healing and whatnot. She'll probably have some better words for it than I just described. And then we're going to put forth 12 comparisons to the Western astrology signs, bearing in mind that we know that acupuncture is traditionally a Chinese medicine practice. So the Western astrology signs don't fit in one-to-one, but we're going to just throw them out there in a speculative fashion. Some of them actually map quite a bit better than others, and we'll give some alternate sort of interpretations, and we'll have a bit of fun with this episode. So welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Arwynne. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah,
again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us how you got started doing acupuncture. When did you get started and how did it happen?
Yeah, good question. I was just working in a clinic that had TCM practitioners, so traditional Chinese medicine practitioners, as well as chiropractors, physios, massage therapists, all sorts of people. And I felt like I understood a little bit of everything that we were offering, except for the TCM part. I was like, qu'est-ce que c'est? Acupuncture. You know,
Right.
I didn't even know what it was and how it worked. And the only thing I did know that I didn't make the connection about was I have seen cupping as a child and thought it was this voodoo,
Right.
like something scary. I didn't really understand what it was, and I didn't know that it was connected to TCM.
Let's tell the audience what cupping is in case they don't know.
Oh, yeah. Good. Yeah. Way to reel me back
Right.
in. I told you I'd be excited about this.
No, I love it. Yeah.
So in traditional Chinese medicine, there are a few ways of treating the body. And one of the mechanisms is acupuncture. That's the insertion of fine needles
Right.
into specific spots on the body to effect change. But another part of it is massage. It's called tuina, just medical massage. That's what it translates to. Another form of it is gua sha, so the scraping. That's kind of what it loosely translates to. But
with
now,
what kind of a tool with
traditionally with jade.
cool.
But I've been known to break a few of those because they're delicate, and I'm a dragon.
Amazing.
And I unfortunately always break them.
Are you a dragon?
I am.
Oh, so is my partner. I love it.
Oh. I've got a few more points about the dragon, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, we'll get there.
So gua sha is becoming a lot more popular in the beauty world these days.
Right.
So you'll probably see a lot of folks using it to like depuff their face and sculpt their face.
Interesting.
But it can be used anywhere on
So
the
it's
body.
like a non-invasive version of
Yes.
of
lymphatic drainage, actually.
Ooh.
But also just massage, breaking up the adhesions. So it's called gua sha. But another aspect is cupping. And what people are very familiar with is fire cupping in particular. And that doesn't mean that I'm applying fire to your skin and it's
Right.
warm or
it's
something
the
like
symbol of fire.
Well, you're using fire to create suction.
Oh,
So
cool.
you're eliminating all this oxygen inside of the cup. And so when you immediately put it on the skin,
So there is actual fire.
there is actual
Amazing.
fire.
Amazing.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
that can be warming, but that's not the main indication for it. The fire aspect is just meant to apply this cup, which looks kind of a round little glass like that you would drink out of, but it's rounded. So you can't really place it on the table. Like it will spill over.
Like a small bowl, like a ramekin almost.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's more like it. You're using this glass cup with the fire, and you put the fire inside of it very quickly, so that way when you apply it to the skin, it sucks the skin inside. Because otherwise, if you just don't have that mechanism, then it won't.
It'll just sit there.
Yeah, it will just be on top of the skin and not doing anything.
Not functioning at all.
Yeah. These days with advancements, we now also have plastic cups. We have silicone cups. Those are my favorite. I love using them almost anywhere. Like if I can, I will. I joke that ever since I was in school almost a decade ago now, I joke that I'm the cupping queen, and I'm holding myself to it.
Like the queen of the cups in tarot.
Yeah.
I love it.
So that's kind of the background of traditional Chinese medicine and how it treats the body, including those other pillars like your sleep, your exercise, your stress, your diet.
Right.
But that's a little bit of a background on it.
Okay, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us what the meridians are.
So around the body, you've got different pathways that correspond to different viscera, like your organs. And that's like kind of in a nutshell. I'm making it very, very, very simple. In a nutshell, we've got these pathways throughout our bodies. They are mostly bilateral, meaning that they're on both sides, but they can be, just like with anything else, there are special extra meridians, but the main ones that we probably will be talking about today are the 12 main ones. And they do correspond to our Western idea of anatomy in terms of the organs. So we have the heart meridian, we have the gallbladder meridian, we've got the longest one, which is the urinary bladder meridian. So we have many of these, and they do have the names of the associated viscera, but they don't necessarily translate as perfectly into Western. So like the heart meridian doesn't necessarily only treat the heart. Like it's got other branches to it or other mechanisms that are not just about the anatomy, but also the emotions. Also, there are slightly more metaphysical aspects of it.
The energy patterns.
Yeah,
and I'm guessing that's because this is such an ancient art that it occurred probably before there was widespread knowledge of actual internal organs and how those systems actually work.
Yeah.
Without the use of MRI machines and all these things.
I know. And that's what makes it so fascinating, because now with the technology that we have, it's starting to prove or disprove those theories, because it really was a theory. And I keep thinking of back to, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just going through memory here, folks like Leonardo da Vinci, who studied anatomy with cadavers and what he saw and how it interacted, but not necessarily, like it was hard to see how maybe the brain responded to something. So there is a lot of assumptions and a lot of theories, but they have been proven correct either with how they were treated, or they've been disproven with like MRI to show you that if you use a fake acupuncture point, then it doesn't have the same effect on the brain, but it still has some effect.
Right.
But if you use the correct one, then it has like a much greater, more obvious effect that we've already been using as a treatment mechanism.
So they've like placebo tested and found that these are actually effective. It's just reinforcing this ancient,
exactly,
almost a technology.
Yeah.
I mean, anything that we use as humans to enhance our lives and it's a tool or a practice is a technology, regardless of.
And I'm not doing it justice, glossing over it so much, because it is about 2,000 years old. These are century-old ideas that we're still practicing to this day.
That have been working for people.
And it's so impressive. Whether it's a placebo effect, there has been benefits, you know, and now we're starting to prove why it is beneficial, or adjust in ways that don't serve us anymore. Like there are certain things that we just don't practice because it is harmful, or it is not what we thought it was. And I like where it is going while still honoring the traditional aspect of it. But again, I could talk about this forever.
It's interesting that like when I say placebo, it's interesting that placebo effect is actually a medically valid treatment in some cases. Like there are some people who, for example, just people who have been horrifically burned, where and using Reiki or using like energy massage where you can't actually touch the body, but you're getting very, very close. Mm-hmm. And that, in some ways in Western medicine, we'll say that, it's a placebo effect because what you're doing is you're just making them think that you're doing something.
Yeah.
But if it's effective,
totally.
If there's pain relief and if there's actually a curative effect happening. Well, then placebo doesn't mean exactly what we think it does. It doesn't mean fake medicine or like psyching someone out. It actually, it is doing something. And I mean, they've even found in testing, especially drugs for mood disorders, and I can't remember the exact wording, but they basically said they respond very, very strongly to the placebo effect, which is like, is it a chicken or the egg thing? Does it mean that all drugs are in a sense a placebo and they only work if you believe it, or are certain drugs not as effective as they would seem?
And there is such a thing as a nocebo effect as
absolutely,
well, which is so wild to me that you can have an active drug interaction with your body, but and not to get too, I don't know, woo-woo about it, I don't know how to describe it, but if somebody's really convinced that like nothing is going to help me, this is my fate, and has decided that they're going to live with that condition or whatever it is, it actually may not work for them.
It can become resistant to treatment, as they say.
But how do you prove that? And it does feel theoretical and doesn't feel like it should work, but that also happens. So there is a lot of mystery still out there. But ultimately, to distill TCM even further, it's based on what you probably already know of, which is the word Qi, spelled QI, and it is a medicine of energy ultimately. And I try not to use that word too often in the clinic, just because not everyone knows what it means. But because of this energy, there you might see it as obvious as just like the kind of energy that you wake up with in the morning, or the kind of energy you feel throughout the month as a female with a menstrual cycle, for example, or just on a daily basis how your energy is affected by your environment. Like there is such a thing as feng shui. Again, I haven't learned too much about, but it does kind of cross over occasionally.
And I mean, however you believe in the actual like system of feng shui, like the rules and the idea about the doorways and I have a little elephant carving that faces the doorway, whatever, it might help. You never know. But everyone has had the experience of walking into certain rooms or certain buildings and just feeling like, oh, I feel comfortable here, or I feel energized here, or the opposite, where you walk in and,
when you enter a room where there are other people and you can feel the energy of the room.
Oh, for sure. Everyone said that.
Yeah, exactly. And that seems really obvious. But how do you, I guess,
where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
It's all energy, and it's all real as anything is real.
Exactly. So I'm very happy to keep talking about it, but I think today is a little bit with a slightly different lens.
Okay,
correct?
So let's talk about the meridians. Let's go through the 12 meridians, and then we can move into the speculative mapping of those meridians to the astrological Western astrology science.
I may need help with that. I'm having your lens.
I've got you. I've basically what we're saying here is that this is a traditional Chinese medicine or TCM practice. And we know that these are not specifically associated with any Western astrology science, but there are certain ones which are very obvious. Like one of the meridians, for example, as you mentioned, is the heart meridian, which of course is perfectly mappable to Leo. Leo rules the heart. It rules the distribution of vital forces, and especially through the blood. It also rules the spine. So pretty obvious that would be a perfect correlation. There's others that don't quite map as well. There's speculation that Libra or Scorpio could rule the kidney meridian. Libra traditionally is said to rule kidneys, the loins, the appendix, the lumbar vertebrae, and the skin. And Scorpio is always associated with the reproductive organs, bladder, the gallbladder, the colon, etc. So we can just go on from there, but let's just talk about the meridians. That's actually known and agreed upon.
Some of you may know that there are 12 primary meridians. Like I said, they do have Western names. They do have their Chinese names, but we tend to use, at least I do, because that's how I was taught in school, is using the English terms for them. So we're talking about the lung and large intestine. They tend to have a connection there, but that's a little less astrological that I know of, at least. And then we've got the stomach and spleen. That's responsible for our digestion and all of that. Heart and small intestine tend to be closely linked together. There are lots of pairings in TCM. Then we've got the urinary bladder and the kidney, the pericardium, which is probably the most I get questions about. It's like, what is that?
Right.
And that tends to be coupled with something else that I get even more questions about, which we call the triple burner.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the last pairing is the gallbladder and the liver meridians. So these 12 meridians, they are paired with the ones that I just discussed, because in the foundation of traditional Chinese medicine, which we will abbreviate to TCM because it's quicker, yin and yang. So that is that symbol that we're all familiar with, the round symbol with the black on one side, the white on the other side, but we have a little bit of each other, both of those. And so where one ends, the other begins, and it's just this beautiful, fluid, harmonious connection.
Totally.
And when that's not in harmony, we call it a disharmony or imbalance. That's where I come in with my acupuncture points or acupressure points. So needles do not have to be used. And that's what I focus on balancing. And that tends to make people feel better, but not necessarily in a way that's obvious to them. So they might come in with like saying that I feel like I'm about to explode. And then I put in that very last point for anyone who might know the points that's on the foot, just between the big toe and the second toe. It's almost as if I've released a drain. And sometimes I've had this happen 2 times in the last 10 years where I'm not sure if there's a connection, but it was 2 different women. They didn't know each other. It was years apart, but they both described it exactly the same way. They said that I've unplugged the drain and everything ran out of them and like trickled, or not even trickled. That seems not intense enough, but they both were, there were tears streaming down their faces, and they weren't sad or happy. They were a little, embarrassed or like a little bit surprised by it. But they said, I'm not sure what's happening, but I can't stop it. And it's just flowing. And I felt like that was the perfect opportunity to use those points. And they felt so much better, but that is not necessarily why they came in, you know? So that's the energetic part that I love seeing and exploring with a patient, and they tend to feel better.
That's really fascinating because as you may or may not know, Pisces is the ruler of feet and toes, and even in like just reflexology, the feet are, where all the points are that map to the body. And one of the other things that Pisces rules is perspiration and the lymphatic processes. And it also rules flus, colds, diseases accompanied by mucus buildup and things like that. So it's really interesting that there's this release point that has to do with the feet, and that you've noticed this in your practice without even having any idea about that whole Pisces connection. So,
that is so interesting,
right?
You're actually, I wonder how we can separate all these ideologies, because they're fascinating by themselves, but there is a lot of overlap. And so one of the things that I don't know how we could separate is the 5 elements in TCM, which is different than
the 4 elements in Western astrology.
Exactly. Or the 4 seasons, because in TCM, there are technically 5 seasons.
Interesting.
So
what are the 4, let's go through the elements first.
So for the elements, we've got the fire sign, earth, air. Oh, sorry, I'm talking about the Western.
I was
ones.
like, that sounds familiar.
No, I'm sorry. So those are the Western ones, right? The fire, earth, air, and water. Whereas in TCM, that's the 5th one is metal. They're associated with those 2 pairings that I was talking about. But it's not a perfect system in that we've got 12 primary, so there's just so much math and so much overlap, and we are using very similar words. So however you see best to separate them, that would be really helpful.
Okay, well, why don't we skip over to talking about the medical astrology of the Western signs, and I can go through some keywords for each of the signs, and then you can jump in as I'm finishing each of the signs and say, oh, that sounds like this, because you know the meridians better than I do.
Yes.
So let's do it that way.
Perfect.
Okay.
Let's try.
Okay, so for Aries rules the head and face and the eyes. It also rules the brain faculties and the distribution of mental and physical energy. So Aries is a fire sign, and the diseases that are associated with Aries are headaches, fevers, neuralgia, eye issues, and eruptions and inflammations, or wounds and accidents, which covers a lot of ground. Does that trigger anything in the...
Very much so. Kind of encompassing a couple of things, but the main thing that it does cover is the fire energy. Mm-hmm. So with the fire signs, that this is where the heart and small intestine are, I guess, ruled by the fire sign, and this is one of the most emotional. I mean, they're all emotional. How to say which one is more?
It's like there's hot emotions and cold emotions.
And that's yin and yang.
Yeah.
So yin is cold.
Yes.
Calm, quiet.
Right.
Dark.
And Aries is the fieriest of the fire signs. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's really nice to have a combination of the two, because that's what's going to help harmonize it a little bit better. So ultimately, we want to maximize and amplify all of your best qualities and minimize and not hide, but like work through the less desirable characteristics that we're born with.
Right. I mean, that's actually a great correlation between Western astrology, the practice of astrological counseling, because everyone has a sun sign and a moon sign and a rising sign. They have like 12 planets traditionally, and they're all in different signs. And no one is going to have everything in one sign. That would be an incredibly unusual mathematical almost impossibility. I think it's physically possible, but extremely rare that you would have everything in one sign, or even in one modality. So you'd have a mix of feminine and masculine, or yin and yang.
That's
and
it.
What you're doing when you're looking at someone's chart and you're counseling them is you're just trying to, as you say, bring out their best qualities and help them to deal with or minimize the bad effects. So if they have their moon opposite Pluto or whatever, and they've got issues with their mother, and they find themselves poisoning their relationships because they have this toxic history of family violence maybe or something, and then they find themselves acting that out in their adulthood, and you find ways of working around that and saying, well, you also have your moon trine Jupiter, and that's a generous and whatever. These examples are just academic, but yeah, it's all about trying to find that balance and work with what you have to make the good things better.
Absolutely. And earlier I was saying that metal is the one thing that we missed, but we also missed wood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Again, my mind is racing in all the directions, and it's hard to organize everything quite right, because we're using so many systems.
Right.
And I'm most familiar with TCM and not necessarily Chinese astrology.
Right.
And
Which
know more
honestly
about...
is actually a little outside the scope. We're not going to be probably bringing much of that in because, as you say, it is just way too complicated to bring in all of these. They're not going to map perfectly. But I thought this was an interesting form of a discussion where we could just kind of bring in all these ideas, find the things where they do map, and then where they don't, you're like, it's just... I
appreciate that. I think we might need to have a few of these conversations before it makes total sense and it's more organized.
And in doing my research, honestly, I was trying to find someone who had already mapped it out perfectly and said, okay, here's where they are. And it doesn't exist.
It's really hard.
So spoiler alert, we're not going to actually be able to map them perfectly. That's just, it's not been done.
But I'm just going to call out for some help. If anyone listening has any idea about how all of this does, to compare and contrast, essentially. I think that would be super cool if you could write in, call in, whatever it is.
Starzology@gmail.com.
There you go.
Absolutely.
That would be very, very helpful for all of us, I would say. But we will continue researching this and trying to see what these parallels are.
Absolutely.
Something that I know just between our conversations, because I'm personally learning a little bit more about just astrology in general from you. So in Chinese astrology, so they talk about these 4 pillars of the year that's associated with your birth, the month, the day, and the time.
Yeah.
And I remember between you and I that I was struggling to find the time of my birth.
A lot of people do.
Yeah, and I was wondering if that would be a hindrance in any case. And so just like a quick overview of what the year represents, why it's even important. Apparently, it's associated with the way we think, whereas the month and day is about the gravity of that personality.
The grounding in the cycle of the Earth versus the cycle of the solar system.
Oh, okay.
Because it's the sun going around the The Earth going around the sun, but then also the Earth going through the seasons. So that makes sense that your sun sign, so to speak, in Western astrology would have to do with that grounding it, because it's to do with the Earth as opposed to about the Earth moving around the sun. So it's the seasons and all that stuff that ties it to the actual Earth and the planting cycle and all that stuff.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. But it was the time that I was especially curious about, because it just comes up so often with people not knowing what the exact time is. And I was thinking like, oh, maybe it doesn't really matter. But, it's considered the four pillars, like, the year, the month, the day, and the time, because all of these are equally important. And specifically, the time is important because it is that someone mentioned that it's like the cusp of where you are in terms of where your strengths and weaknesses are, or if there's anything special or different about it. From a TCM perspective, what I'm looking for is whether you're in a state of excess or deficiency, which might not make a lot of sense to somebody. But imagine if you are holding on to a lot of water and you're very swollen and heavy and tired. That's considered an excess condition that I treat, that I will reduce, so that way you've got a little bit of better drainage or something else. Whereas the deficiency part of it is where, the easiest example would be deficient in nutrients, and it's really obvious in like the pale skin or nails or something, or the weakness in somebody's body, that, or even hair, that's visible. All of these excess and deficiencies can also apply to every other aspect of you and your existence.
That's so interesting. And obviously in Western astrology, the reason that's important to know the time is because that's your rising sign. And that's where the sun was rising the moment you were born. And the reason the moment is important is because it changes every couple of hours. It goes into a different sign. So the sign on your ascendant or rising sign is like your personality, the face that you give to the world. It's the first thing people see about you. And it's that moment that you took that first breath is so important, because that's when you literally inspired, like you were inspirited in your soul, so to speak.
Like, I never made that connection with the word inspired.
Yeah, inspire. It's like to breathe in.
Yeah, and that is very important in TCM, and I didn't appreciate how important it was 10 years ago. Imagine when I was just embarking on learning about it.
A young warthog.
But they were talking, meaning my teachers, my instructors, my professors, all of those who taught me about TCM, they talked about that first breath.
Right.
And I didn't really realize how important it is, but that first breath, we inhale the two energies that define our constitution. So that's something that I talk a lot about, unfortunately, in clinic, is a person's constitution.
Right.
And that's made up by the constitution of your parents and the environment that you're in. And so all of your lifestyle choices. So those two aspects define who you are in a very, very, very basic way.
DNA strands twining around each other.
Well, is that a coincidence? Or is that
Is that one of those symbolic just truths, the synchronicity of symbols?
Yeah.
Right.
But with like the other aspect of it can be very metaphysical when you're talking about, especially as Chinese astrology, because there's just so much talk about energy. Yeah. But even just on the day, the year, the time, the month, all of that, when you're born, you've got two aspects to you. There's like the heavenly aspect and there's the earthly aspect. Right. And you're kind of in the middle of the two because you're getting like best of both worlds. Right. But that tends to define your constitution, your characteristics, your personality, and your fate, essentially, your destiny.
Right, right. Yeah. And Chinese astrology is definitely much more, we would say, deterministic in that sense, the fate. And this is something I've found, like, now we're starting to get a little bit of a tangent, but I have to bring this up because it's so interesting to me. One of my best friends is Chinese. She was actually born in China, came over when she was like 7. So she's lived in Canada all her life. Every year, her mother will call her on her birthday, and then she'll call her again, like 3 weeks or so later, and be like, it's your birthday. And she's like, what? And she always just thought, mom's, a little wacky, like she's getting up there in years, whatever. But she and her brothers and sisters recently got together, discovered that there's actually something to this, like there's 2 different years, obviously. And so they may actually not even know what their physical birthday was. It might be slightly different. And like, this is baffling to me. I'm like, well, what day was it?
Yeah,
I mean, she doesn't know with the time, and she might never know the time. But I've resigned myself to that. But like this idea that your birthday might be like 3 weeks or even a month later or earlier.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's beyond the scope of this. But it's just to show you, like, even in the modern world, these things that we think of as just pretty much set in stone.
And it is fluid. And that's what drew me to TCM in general, was that how poetic it was and how beautifully it described the world we live in and the how we are and how we interact and all of that. It is quite stunning, honestly, and it's so seasonal. It's so we're meant to live harmoniously in the environment, and including the people we surround ourselves by. So like, not just who we are born from, like from our parents, but the environment that we're in, as well as the people who are around us, because they affect us so much.
Absolutely.
And so in
it's
your
like
friends,
weather systems, or you're just
you're
constantly creating an environment of either bringing out the best in each other or clashing. And
and I think it's easy to describe that clash, where that disharmony is like by saying like, oh, I'm craving ice cream in December, like in the winter, you know, in a very cold environment, if you're in our hemisphere,
right?
And that is obviously not, there's a disconnect there. Like you want something like a hot cocoa, like you want to cup it with both hands. Like there is a certain order.
Exactly. But I think we've all had that experience of like having ice cream on a cold day, and it actually makes you feel warmer on the inside for some weird reason.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it is appealing to something else that is a little more subconscious.
Totally. Well, okay. So we've not gotten off track, because I think this is a wonderful conversation, but I want to just go through the rest of the signs, pull it back for anyone listening to this and going, wait a minute, astrology.
Thanks for reeling us back in. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through Taurus. Taurus rules the neck, the ears, the throat, the larynx, and the tonsils. And this is why we always say there are so many beautiful singers or people who have wonderful voices who are Taurus people or have a lot of signs in Taurus or planets in Taurus. It also rules the recuperative forces. So this is like, it's ruled by the symbol of the bull. So we think of the bull as like this strong and, kind of majestic animal. And it rules diseases which attack the throat. It's all in the throat area, throat chakra, so to speak, if we're going to, not to bring a whole nother system into it, like scratch that from the record. Does that ring any bells with the meridians?
As a
you
Taurus,
are a Taurus, exactly.
I could totally see it. I've never been a singer, but I was just thinking that if I were to put on my like Chinese astrological hat, as a dragon, I definitely like singing, but as a group, because I require a lot more movement as opposed to standing and projecting. I like being part of something.
Totally.
And around people, and maybe more dancing.
I have actually found that to be true with a lot of Taurus people I know. My best friend is a Taurus, or maybe a Gemini. We talked about that. But she and I go dancing all the time, and we are very active together. You and I are very active together, biking and walking and all kinds of stuff. So I could definitely see that fortitude and that physical strength and also that throat chakra thing. I'm not going to say chakra again. That's going to just confuse matters. All right, moving on to Gemini. So Gemini rules the arms, the shoulders, the muscles, and the bones in these areas, as well as the lungs, the trachea, and the bronchi. I'm just going to say bronchi, as well as the hands. And in some ways, being the sign of the twins, it rules anything where there's 2 of them, except the brain hemispheres. And anyway, we're getting into the weeds here, or I'm saying it the wrong thing. Either way, it also rules breathing and anything connected to the lungs. The diseases associated with it are anything to do with bronchial complaints, consumption, as it says, nerve diseases, pneumonia, and asthma.
Consumption in this case is referring to diabetes.
Right.
Yeah, and for any Chinese listeners,
if you're not listening from the 1910s. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, some of these terms are archaic, but I studied them, and some of them do come up.
What
respect
do we call
them.
that now? Yeah, exactly. So Cancer does not rule Cancer, as some might think, but it rules the stomach, the breasts, the solar plexus, the diaphragm, and the upper part of the liver. I'm not sure. And it affects everything to do with digestion and nutrition. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Again, I'm struggling to make these parallels because the elements in TCM, that the 5 elements I'm talking about, so wood, fire, earth, metal, water, they have the corresponding meridians and the different corresponding organs, but there is overlap with what you're saying with 2 different things.
Yes. This is definitely not a one-to-one thing.
Yeah, it really isn't. It's hard to put it in that bucket.
It's so tempting because there's 12 of them.
Yeah.
So I think it's just interesting to go through these. And if anyone was ever wondering, if anyone other than me ever wondered, hey, there's 12 of these, 12 of these, why don't we? This is why.
Yeah,
here's totally. Here's why we don't do that by trying to do it. Okay, so moving on to Leo. Leo rules the heart, the spine, and the spinal column. So anything to do with the vital forces that are that travel through the blood is ruled by Leo. And the diseases of Leo include poor circulation, heart trouble, heart attacks, obviously, and anything to do with the heart.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So moving on to Virgo. Virgo rules the intestines, the lower part of the liver, as if we're going to divide it up between that and Cancer, and assimilation and absorption, so the digestion of nutrients. And Virgo is traditionally seen as holding that sheaf of wheat. So it's like she's the queen of the harvest. Yeah. So it has to do with the seasons. And Virgo is like the season of the fall and the harvest and nutrition.
So back to those seasons. Yeah. In TCM, there are 5 seasons.
Right.
This is corresponding to late summer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, but it's like pre-fall, but like very late summer.
Well,
so it's not considered summer.
Fall doesn't even start until September 21st, which is almost the end of Virgo.
Yeah.
So it's really late summer. All right, Libra. Libra rules the kidneys, the loins, the appendix, the lumbar vertebrae, and the skin. And it's said to rule the liquid processes of the body. And Libra also rules kidney afflictions and afflictions to the spine.
This one does kind of overlap in that you're describing a water element. That's represents the wisdom, the depth, the winter, the color black or very dark blue.
Interesting.
And on the other side of it, imbalanced, it results in fear, insecurity, and urinary issues.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Moving on to Scorpio. Scorpio rules the organs of reproduction, the bladder, the gallbladder, the colon, and the rectum. It rules anything to do with procreation and reproduction and elimination. So its diseases, of course, would be any kind of sexual and reproductive diseases and anything to do with those parts of the body.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Yeah, that one overlaps with a couple of elements.
Yeah. It's a pretty big part of life.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny that Scorpio is in some ways vilified, but yet it gets to rule the reproductive system.
Yeah.
And who doesn't love the, that system. Anyway, as a Virgo, I'm like trying to skirt around those words. What is wrong with me? I'm a grown-ass woman. Okay. Sagittarius. Sagittarius rules the hips, thighs, and sciatic nerves. And it's interesting because it's symbolized by the centaur, so it rules the hips and thighs. But in traditional astrology, it would have 4 of those. So it's all about legs. Interestingly, we've got some old-timey words associated with Sagittarius, including gout, rheumatism, sciatica, as well as accidents affecting the legs. So
the king's disease, gout, red meat, red wine, excess, indulgence.
That is Sagittarius right there. It's ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is like the king of the gods.
Oh goodness, you just brought in planets into this?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
We'll rein it in. Moving on to Aquarius. Aquarius is ruling the lower leg, so the calves and the ankles, as well as the teeth and the circulation system. So interesting.
Okay. That's very watery to me.
And Aquarius is an air sign, but it's interesting that it is called Aquarius. It's the water bearer. Diseases that have to do with Aquarius are ankle complaints, accidents that affect the ankles, and that seems to be to me like a very supporting kind of system. So like even though Pisces rules the feet, having Aquarius rule the ankles. I mean, feet have their own issues, but ankle issues are are usually indicative of something else, right? When you have swollen ankles, that's indicative of like different diseases. And so blood diseases and nervous diseases and even heart issues can be seen in swelling of the ankles and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, the way you're describing it is very much water element, water energy, that kind of thing. I appreciate it. And I think it just gives us another way of describing things.
And speaking of Pisces, this is the last one. And we've talked a bit about it already because it rules the feet and toes, going through the diseases and the things that are ruled by it in traditional medicine. It's perspiration, the lymphatic processes, influenzas, colds, diseases, and also infectious diseases. And stuff like that, and as well in modern parlance, we would say like addictions and things and alcoholism and whatnot. Those are all kind of Piscean, not strictly, obviously, but they are they're ruled by Pisces and anything that has to do with escapes from reality. So like sleep disorders and issues of addiction.
Very cool. Thanks
and
for
also
going
mental issues. That's another one. But there's a whole topic for another day.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything more you want to say about?
Oh my gosh. I feel like we barely said anything.
I know, right?
But at the same time, there's so much. I'm not really sure. I think we need many more of these conversations to at least organize our own thoughts and how to connect all these different systems. We talked about chakras. We talked about TCM, and we talked about Western astrology.
And the elements, and the different elements, the 5 elements, the 4 elements, the seasons, the yin and yang.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot to it, and I hope this was just a taste.
Exactly. It's like a sample platter.
Yeah.
A shareable platter for the whole table, which is the world. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Thank you so much for having me, Arwynne.
Really, really illuminating and interesting. And if you, as our listeners, have found value in this episode, please feel free to share it. We will be delving into related topics in the future. And if you have anything you want to have us discuss, please just find us on Starzology.com. You can send us a message at starzology@gmail.com. You can find me, Arwynne, at mspink.net. And I blog weekly there. And we will see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me, Arwynne.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the 2 main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.